Oh, thank you.
You're live.
Excellent. So welcome to the Racial Profiling Ad Hoc Committee of the Oakland Police Commission. I'm your chair, Chair Emeritus Jackson. We have Chair Peterson with us, as well as Commissioner Garcia Acosta and Deputy Chief Brian Hubbard. Let's see who else is on. Okay, for now, and as well as Micah Montgomery, our Chief of Staff. We may be joined later by a couple of our regular ad hoc members, as well as any new ones that may attempt to join in addition to our public community members who are following along with us. We have been quite productive, and so I just want to kind of run down what we have done and what we're planning to do tonight, as well as what we can look forward to. So our first meeting, we reviewed the manual of rules. Our second was to provide an overview, contextualized racial profiling history across the country. And then we also reviewed the actual M19 policy. Last meeting, we were joined by Darlene Flynn, the Director of Race and Equity for the City of Oakland. And we decided to put together a preamble or introduction to the language of the, the history of racial profiling in this country. We will review the preamble at our next meeting, and then hopefully we will be able to finish our update of M19 tonight and maybe discuss the discipline that we'd like to see connected to that policy. Meanwhile, Deputy Chief Hubbard will be working on the training document. We will probably need to review that at the end of June. That may take a little time to put together. And then after we finish that, we will turn our attention to the discipline matrix. We're hoping that we'll be able to start that work July 1. So I have thrown a lot at you. And for those people who have been following along, it's not new. It's just an overview of what we have already been able to accomplish with everyone's positive contributions. So with that, if that's okay with everyone, I want to defer to Deputy Chief Hubbard to take us through our M19 edits and updates to see if we are ready to move on from that and to discuss what we think would be appropriate discipline for any sustained ruling on racial profiling. I see Commissioner Garcia Acosta's hand up. Commish?
Thank you, Commissioner Jackson. Yeah, I just wanted to add to the recap and lift up a little bit of the discussion that we've had in the last two previous meetings, just around like branding, acknowledgement, and really doing a straight line to discipline. And I really like some of, I keep on calling you Lieutenant Hubbard.
Deputy Chief.
Deputy Chief, there we go. All right. Deputy Chief Hubbard's ideas around, some of the branding, some of the taglines, and having that be something that is really integrated throughout the fabric of the department, from training, and then in different spaces physically throughout the department. So as we're making these final revisions, looking at the training, I want us to always kind of keep a lens and an eye on those opportunities, as well as following up with the suggestion of at some point getting Chief Mitchell to really kind of champion some of the work that comes out of this, and then really, see what kind of ideas and things that he may want to, take with what our group develops, and then, start putting his mark on the department. So I just wanted to lift that up as we're, getting through these technical aspects of
very important words. Thank you very much for reminding us of that. it's such important work. And the deputy chief and I were also talking about the fact that the police officers that finish the academy don't really know much about us as a commission. And so we're going to be working on an introduction, but it is likely that this last academy, maybe one of the first policies they may review will be the racial profiling one, which actually will be quite excellent, since it is a, kind of a starter for understanding the work that they need to be accountable to and transparent with. Because we know that there is a root of racial profiling that, just can't be ignored, and it needs to go away. So with that, thank you. Deputy Chief Hubbard, are you ready to go, or you need some time?
I am ready. I'm just going to share my screen here.
Sounds good.
Okay. Can everyone see that?
Yes, sir.
All right, let me expand here. Okay. So
okay, so Deputy Chief, I can't
Yes.
see that though.
uh,
Little bit bigger, please.
oh, you can see it, but
Yes.
How's
Okay,
that?
so much better. I don't want to have to whip out my magnifying glass.
for sure. Let me get it a little bit bigger here.
That's fine right there, I think. That's
Okay.
pretty good. Chair Peterson, does that work for you too? Chair Peterson? Micah? Anybody?
Yes, that works for
Can
me.
hear you. Yeah, it looks good.
Okay. Okay, great. It's for those of us that are wearing glasses. I just want to make sure that we could all see.
It's actually beautiful. Thank you.
Okay.
It's quite perfect for my eyes with glass.
Excellent, excellent.
All right. So for the sake of brevity, but also the document has so many track changes because of all the changes that we've made. It's hard to read, especially in an online forum. So what I did was I just took out the sections that I updated since we talked 2 weeks ago. A lot of this came from Darlene Flynn. Above this that you don't see, I do have a draft preamble, but because we haven't yet heard feedback from her, we're going to skip over that for now, and hopefully she'll get back to us so you'll have time to review it before our next meeting. So I basically just copied and pasted these into sections. So, and I'll give you some context. So this is the section that Darlene Flynn raised issues about regarding suspicious behavior. And I expanded this a little bit more. So it reads, members shall not consider actual or perceived race, ethnicity, national origin, gender, age, religion, sexual orientation, or disability in establishing either reasonable suspicion or probable cause, or when carrying out law enforcement activity. Suspicious activity must be based on specific articulable facts and circumstances consistent with criminal behavior and should not be generalized to a demographic group. The officer must clearly state the reason for a stop before engaging in questioning related to criminal investigations or traffic violations, and document this reason on any resulting citation or police report in accordance to the Vehicle Code 2806.5 or the Assembly Bill that's associated with that 2773. So this, it expands it a little bit more, but it really promotes our efforts, of course, to know the reason behind these activities. And if officers are documenting it and their chain of command is reviewing it, we're able to hold people accountable. Okay.
Yes, sir. Sounds good.
All right.
I have-
Not too different, but in a different section under
Before you
conducting.
go
Oh,
ahead.
sorry about that. Chair Peterson's hand is
Oh,
up. My
Yes,
apologies.
and I'm sorry, DC Hubbard, this is of course citing the new law that requires that an officer state the reason for stopping an individual.
It does, yes, and this issue is raised by Deacon Lyle, so it's a combination of his concern and also what Darlene Flynn said about how we just had this generalized suspicious behavior in our old policy, And I wanted to expand on that where it needs to be articulable facts of why it's suspicious, not just because they're suspicious. Yeah.
Right.
Correct.
Thank you.
Okay. Conducting stops. This is a different section. The policy clearly state the reason for a stop before engaging in questioning related to criminal investigations or traffic violations and document the reason. So this is
Yeah.
in a different spot, but it serves as a reminder of we want officers to communicate the reason. And again, this removes, this was just another section where it just blatantly in a blanket said suspicious behavior. This again requires the officer to state the reason, which then removes just that can language.
And can I ask a question about when the body worn camera is activated? This will be recorded on an active body worn camera, right? This reason that is given, articulated to the person. The officer should already have that body worn camera on. And they have to manually turn it on. It doesn't. Yeah. Okay.
That's correct. And so there's another policy that addresses this, and the policy reads that it shall be activated before these encounters occur. So let's say that I'm pulling someone over. In that process of pulling them over, this is a vehicle stop. My body worn camera needs to be on. So by the time I walk up to their window to speak with them, it's already recording. So therefore it would record this entire encounter.
So should we reference that body worn camera?
Yep.
Vision that requires that before they approach an individual, the body worn camera must be activated.
Certainly. Yeah, great idea. I'll do that. Yep. Okay. All right. As we discussed last week, and I wrote a lot here, and I wanted to do a lot of research behind this. I added a whole new section on handcuffing. We do have training, and we do have a policy on handcuffing. And when I was in training as a sergeant many years ago, I spent a whole season addressing this issue because there was a habit being formed that searches and handcuffing, or even detentions for that matter, somehow got knotted up together. And those two things are not interchangeable. Each one of those actions have some type of intrusive level. And for each intrusive action, the officer must articulate why they did what they did. So in other words, officers are not supposed to say, I detained Brian Hubbard and I also handcuffed them. That doesn't tell me anything. That just means that you just assume that because I'm detained, I can therefore be handcuffed. So created this whole new section. I hope that flushes it out. So I'll read it. The application of handcuffs by officers shall be conducted in a manner consistent with legal standards and departmental guidelines, ensuring that such restraints are neither arbitrary nor discriminatory. Handcuffs shall only be applied for legitimate law enforcement purposes and when necessary to ensure the safety of the officer, the individual, or the public. The decision to apply handcuffs must be based on specific and articulable facts, not on the individual's race, ethnicity, gender, or other protective characteristics. Officers must evaluate each situation independently and ensure that the use of handcuffs is proportionate to the perceived threat or risk, considering the totality of the circumstances, including the individual's behavior, the severity of the suspected offense, and the potential risk of harm. Handcuffs are a significant and intrusive measure, and officers must be mindful of the physical and psychological impact on the individual, applying handcuffs in a manner that minimizes discomfort and does not cause unnecessary injury. Yeah, a lot there.
That's good. Yeah.
And I know also that there is a group of, I would say, our thought partners in CPA who are wanting or in the process of forming a group to discuss handcuffing. So
Good.
This is a important part of this whole process that's being honed in on separately.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
And also, I know there's particular interest in looking at this policy, and also wonder, Deputy Chief, if there's a distinction between in this policy when it applies to minors and handcuffing minors and juveniles. And if not, that may be something that group also takes a look at as well.
Sure. I'll make a note of that just because I am reviewing that other policy. And that's great.
Of course you are. Now, let me ask you this question. It has nothing to do with the subject matter, but do you have somebody that is serving as like your understudy that, you know, not unlike the trainings that you've done, that you're helping to prep someone else who can work on policy as well? We love you, trust and believe, but this means you can't get sick, you can't go on vacation, you can't do any of the things that we want you to be able to do. So I just wondered.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. We actually do have a policy and publications unit. I'm sure you've met Officer Cervantes before, and led by Sergeant Urquiza. One of the initiatives that I'm trying to make, and this is going to be, I think, an easier initiative now that we have a new chief and he's looking for fresh ideas, is we have a lot of commanders here, and I like to see each one of them be a project manager of something. And so if we talk about handcuffs, that would be given to, let's say, a captain, and he or she can have their team and they can work on this policy together and I think we would just be a lot more efficient, because right now it's kind of bottlenecked into 3 of us who are doing this. Yeah.
Well, like I said, it's fantastic, but the opportunity to share that experience across sectors would undoubtedly give a lot of new skill and new training opportunities. So that's great.
Thank you.
Deacon Lyles has his hand up.
Oh,
Hello,
thank you.
sorry.
I didn't even realize you had joined us, Deacon Lyles.
Yes,
My apologies.
I'm sorry I was a little late.
Yeah,
Forgive me.
you're okay. You're
Um,
running from one thing to the next. We got you.
Yeah, I like what I've been hearing, but I have one question.
Yes, sir.
Where is this recorded, and how is it recorded?
The
Now,
discussion or the policy?
no, the policy,
Okay.
and so the policy addresses what the individual officers ought to do and shall do. Now, how do we know that they did that?
Oh, you
Where
mean-
is it recorded, or should it be recorded somewhere? I did stop
Yeah.
Mr. Lyles for running a stop sign. He
Mhm.
was very agitated. He threw a cigarette butt in my face. We pushed him against the car and applied handcuffs. Where is that written? Is that written in the report, or is it be in the handcuffing report, or a separate report, or what? How do we?
Isn't handcuffing a use of force?
Not in itself, but
No?
the scenario presented by Deacon Lyles, and thank you for the question. It's recorded in 3 different areas, actually. I'm using that scenario, and then I'll back up a little bit further. So because handcuffs are applied, it would be considered a seizure of a person. Therefore, we have to do a stop data form. And in that form, it's a yes or no, were handcuffs applied? Because handcuffs were applied and because a seizure occurred, the officer has two ways of documenting it. It's either in a police report, which in this scenario, that would be the version, or if there was nothing further than just the detention, then it would be a field investigative report and a narrative to go with that.
Okay,
In this scenario, there's actually a 3rd element to it, which would be actually a 4th. It would be the use of force report, because the pushing, pulling, and then subsequent arrest would be a use of force by the officer. And he or she would have to then document that handcuffs were applied and the reason behind it. Yeah.
okay, thank you. Appreciate it.
And I'll back up with just a little bit more. I'll just take it on its simplest form. Let's just say I go out there and I detain and handcuff someone, but I let them go. There's no disposition beyond that. The stop data form where I say, yes, I handcuff, that's published in an Excel spreadsheet. And within that spreadsheet, I have all the details, so then I can go back and review the field investigative report and then verify that the officer is following this policy.
Thank you.
Yeah. A little bit complicated, I know. There's a lot of paper that goes along with this. Okay. Yeah, all right. I was a little uneasy about this section, just I would not, I shouldn't say uneasy, but based on Darlene Flynn, her recommendation was to expand on this, and I did, but I was hoping to also get this to her and have her review it. But this was the section of partnership with the City of Oakland, Department of Race and Equity. And here's what I wrote. The OPD is dedicated to building a strong partnership with the City of Oakland Department of Race and Equity to address racial profiling effectively. This collaboration aims to achieve shared goals through joint efforts and coordinated actions, emphasizing mutual accountability and transparency. Guided by successful strategies and insight from key figures in the field, the OPD benefits from the expertise of the Department of Race and Equity, which highlights several effective approaches for developing and implementing policies that foster a more just and equitable city. Through interactive dialogues and collaborative efforts, the common constraints and challenges faced by policymakers and practitioners are addressed, ensuring continuous progress towards a fairer community. By nurturing this partnership, the OPD strives to develop and maintain policies that combat racial profiling and promote equity and justice. This commitment ensures that all community members are treated fairly and respectfully. The ongoing collaboration reflects a shared dedication to building community where trust and mutual respect form the foundation of law enforcement practices. I'm hoping that captures what Darlene Flynn and her team does. Where it does lack is specifics on what exactly, maybe there's a cadence to this, like they will help review this policy annually or something like that. That is probably where I need a little bit more help from her of what her team wants to do to help further our efforts. Yeah.
I think this looks really good. What I wonder is if there is any possibility or appropriateness in this third paragraph to mention, building a trustworthy culture. And if it's not meant to be here, then that's fine. But I don't want to see our discussion of culture kind of only in the cultural accountability statement. I'm hoping that we can weave this concept of, building community trust, whereby we build a healthier culture, not just within the City of Oakland, but by prioritizing our community. But maybe it doesn't fit here because you're just talking about race and equity. So forgive me if I'm off track.
No, I like it. I think we're speaking the same language as I guess I just wanted more insight on what she does, not only for this police department, but the City of Oakland. So this is not only a police department statement, it also speaks to the City of Oakland as a whole. So that's what I was hoping to conclude this policy with. But yeah, I agree. Building a trustworthy culture, not just here, but everywhere. And yeah, so I'm going to send this to her and ask just she help, because the only advice she gave in the last meeting was that she just wanted this expanded. So I should have asked more clarifying questions, but this is the best I came up with thus far.
We were throwing a lot at you, and she had so much good stuff. I couldn't keep up with my note taking,
Yeah.
so I get it.
Okay, the last thing that was updated since our last meeting was I updated the glossary to include detention. I know we had a lot of discussion on that. So I updated, I gave 3 new definitions. So I'll start with just the mere detention. A police detention based on reasonable suspicion, also known as a Terry stop, is a brief, non-intrusive stop of an individual by law enforcement officers based on specific and articulable facts that led the officers to suspect that the person may be involved in criminal activity. This belief must be more than a mere hunch and should be grounded in observable behavior, information from reliable sources, or the totality of the circumstances. The detention must be temporary and last only as long as necessary to conform or dispel the officer's suspicion, with the scope limited to what is necessary to achieve its purpose, such as questioning the individual or conducting a pat-down search for weapons if there is concern for officer safety. The officer must articulate specific facts that justify the stop, which could include unusual behavior, evasive actions, the time of day, the location, or contextual factors. The detention must be lawful and based on an objective assessment of the circumstances, and any evidence obtained during an unlawful detention may be inadmissible in court. There's a lot there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anybody have any comments or any unease?
I just want to ask, when you say the officer must articulate specific facts that justify the stop, that's under the previous legislation that you quoted above. That kind of articulation, that full articulation.
Yeah, so that's kind of the ambiguity of the law. It doesn't say give the top to bottom A to Z reason. It just says give the reason. So if, you know, the problem with like what if there was a community member who identified the like, I don't want to expose a community member to further risk by saying, hey, that person said that you're involved here and that's the reason why I'm stopping you, versus I'm stopping you because I'm investigating a robbery that just occurred. And, you know, I satisfy the law, but in my report and all the police documents that will go to the DA's office, et cetera, that entire reason will be listed. I hope that makes sense.
I'm always just concerned about ambiguity that allows an officer to escape accountability ultimately in the arbitration, not necessarily within the investigative phase.
Yeah.
Does it make sense to provide an example engagement? You know, like literally your wording of, I stopped you because of X.
Certainly, I'm okay with putting that here in the policy or making it or putting it
In the
at
training
the
document.
training. Yeah. So we can play with both.
Okay. I think that's good. You know, I find that as we move on, particularly coming out of the pandemic with such young new officers, that sometimes social engagement and clear communication are skills that are still being developed, I think. So sometimes if we could make suggestions, that might be helpful.
Yeah, great. Okay. Next is consensual encounter. I kind of made a note to myself last time that I want to develop this because it's often misunderstood. Consensual encounter is a voluntary interaction between law enforcement officers and individuals that does not involve coercion, detention, or restriction of an individual's freedom to leave. During a consensual encounter, individuals are free to disregard the officer's requests and walk away without any consequences. Officers do not need reasonable suspicion or probable cause to initiate a consensual encounter.
Okay, there goes that reasonable suspicion again. I thought we were trying to get rid of that everywhere.
Reasonable suspicion is a legal definition that's attached to a detention. Same thing with probable cause to arrest.
Yeah, you can't get rid of that.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's what I was trying to say at our last discussion, that's a coin of the realm. That's part of California law. You have to, that's the
Okay.
the lowest station of starting an inquiry by a police officer. They have to have reasonable suspicion.
Okay, and so this concept of intelligence-led just does not always apply. Sometimes it's a guessing game.
Well, so let's just take intelligence-led. So intelligence-led is developing reasonable suspicion to effect a detention. Where reasonable suspicion would not apply is that an officer stops someone for zero reason, no criminal behavior, no vehicle code violation. That would be unlawful. That would violate this policy based on the definition provided above and the expectation attached to that. But also, I mean, it violates the Fourth Amendment because you need quote reasonable suspicion. But you know what I'll do? I'll clean this up. I'm going to create a definition of reasonable suspicion. How about that?
There we go.
I don't know why I
Okay.
didn't think of that before. And probable cause. I got it.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, I'm arguing with myself here.
And can I just say, take a moment to say why this is important? Because if we don't follow what is the law, we just open ourselves up for criticism.
That's
And
correct.
they will say we're just crazy. We don't know the law, and so we should be ignored.
Right, making it up as we go. I get
Yeah.
it. And
Yeah.
so then that, those definitions will also make it to our glossary.
Yes,
Once we take, okay, great, thank you.
okay. Last is consent search. There's one thing I do want to add to this I'll talk about shortly. A consent search is conducted based on the voluntary permission given by the person to be searched rather than on probable cause, an incident to arrest, or a search warrant. The scope of the search is limited to the areas the officer regionally believe were authorized by the individual giving consent. Consent must be given voluntarily without coercion, and the individual providing consent must have the legal authority to do so. The one thing I am going to add here is one unique thing in our policy that's not required by law, but we wrote many years ago, is that we have to tell the person that they have the right to refuse consent. The
Mhm.
law does not require, but that's a good procedural justice thing we can do, is say, hey, do you mind if I search your person? By the way, you can say no. That's the expectation.
Yes, so at the end of that sentence, where you say they must have the legal authority to provide consent.
Yeah.
Is that like if they're not driving their own car, if they don't own it, or, I mean, can you help me understand what gives somebody the legal authority to provide consent?
Yeah, so we're talking about, it's called standing. It's only the person who has standing has the authority to give consent. So here's an example. Let's say that you all are over my house right now. We're having a party and the police show up to the front door and I'm nowhere to be found, but one of you says, yeah, come on in and search the whole house. What do I care for? That's not
Mm.
valid consent because you don't have standing over the house to give consent. However, if a friend gives a friend a car, that friend is giving standing to that person to where they then can give consent to the officer. Yeah.
Okay, and whose responsibility is it to determine
Yeah.
legal authority?
The officer, that's a great question, because this is probably the longest block within search and seizure law that I used to teach. It was so difficult to tell officers this, and young recruits in the academy had said the burden is on the officer to determine that. One cannot just assume. So let's use juveniles as an example. You know, a toddler, of course they would give consent to a police officer, but they don't have standing. Yeah, it's
Right.
like you have to do the work on that. And just because a person says, yeah, go ahead, you need to do a little bit more digging into that to see if they actually have the authority to give that consent. So speaking of, I suppose I can add a definition of what standing is. There we
Yes,
go.
thank you.
I'd be happy to do that. All right. Okay, so that is everything that we talked about last week that has since been updated.
Okay, so for the most part, you're gonna have a conversation with Darlene to expand upon that section of partnership. Then you're gonna add a few more definitions for us to review along with the preamble in our next meeting,
That's right.
correct? Okay, so if everyone is comfortable, what I'd like to do now is shift to a discussion on discipline. What do we think the appropriate discipline for an officer sustained for racial profiling would look like? And I'm not, because we haven't, yet gone through the discipline matrix, maybe you could provide us a thought process or provide some context for where we might start. I mean, I recognize that M19 is the overall racial profiling policy. If someone does it, can you be up to and including termination, or because I know that we talk about, if officers are found to lie, that is terminable. I think that racial profiling is a significant and oftentimes horrific experience for someone to have to go through. So if you could give us an overview on how we might think or what we might consider when we are trying to identify the discipline that should be connected to racial profiling.
Sure. And if you don't mind, I can give you a little snippet of our current discipline policy, the matrix, and it'll
Yes.
show you kind of how it works. So let me get this on the screen here.
Thank you.
I promise to expand it here. Give me one moment. Okay, I'll start from the left here and move my way right. So imagine our matrix is made up of hundreds of what you see here. So this right here, 314.03, is the code section that we use, just as a reference. Okay, I think I made up a new number for the racial profiling one. I don't know if it's going to be that exact, but it kind of fits where it's supposed to be, what I thought in the current matrix. This section would be the title of it. Now I can stop there and we can actually discuss this maybe if you want, of like, what do we want to call this? Do we want to call it racial profiling violation, racial profiling, or discriminatory behavior, but more specific to public discriminatory behavior, not the city of Oakland discriminatory behavior? So that's something that we can talk about.
Yes, so let me offer, because we kind of got caught up in this a little bit during our last commission meeting, where the CIPRA director was talking about racial profiling, but in the next sentence he was talking about discrimination.
Yeah.
And the two were kind of commingled, and a member of the community asked, so what's your definition of discrimination? Is it not, racial profiling?
Yeah.
And so I think that the title should correlate as closely as possible to the policy violation. So I would say racial profiling violation or something like that.
Yeah.
I don't know what other people, want to suggest, but I think racial profiling should definitely be in the title.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we can even put in there violating DGO M19, something word specific. And again, if we all move on, just the next person, so they understand that. And I don't know, again, why it wasn't included in the original draft of or finalization of the discipline matrix. I have my suspicion that what they wrote, they thought was for racial profiling, but it morphed into something else. But yeah, just whatever we can make it to be very clear.
Yeah, well, we could all have our assumptions and presumptions. I think the challenge is that not a lot of attention was given to this policy because they forgot to do a manual of rules. They forgot to do a discipline. It's almost like maybe this will never come to pass, so we won't finish this.
Yeah.
That's my personal opinion. It is not, in fact.
Okay.
But we are correcting all of this now. I see your hand up, Chair Peterson.
Yes, and my hand is up because there has been discussion, and it's been brought to our attention at a regular meeting by Mr. Bay, that it's not just racial profiling. We wanted to capture all the, profile.
So the protected classes is what you're talking about?
Yeah, so is this a time to make sure it's clear that it's not just racial profiling that this policy addresses? Can we change, in other words, the name of the M19?
Yeah.
So I think what you're suggesting is that maybe we're now going to call it violation of M19, because in the body of the policy, we do discuss racial profiling and that of all protected classes being, inappropriate, illegal, whatever the words are that we're using. So that's a good point to raise. Deputy Chief, that sounds like it makes more sense. M19 violation or violation of DGO M19. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, that's great, but I'll just to add what Chair Peterson said, the title of the actual policy is, as I open up here, prohibitions regarding racial profiling and other bias-based policing. So that we could change.
Kind of covers it. Okay.
Yeah, well, maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. And that's something I didn't even think of until, like maybe like of all this discussion, we absolutely can change the title of this to make it more impactful and more apropos of what the policy says. So,
And I
So
only
can you
read
read it? Oh, I'm sorry.
I only
So-
raised that because in the discipline committees that I've been exposed to, a lot of the pushback is around ambiguity. Well, it doesn't say that, this particular type of profiling is illegal. I didn't see it in the title, something. It could be the most nonsensical way of looking at it, but that seems to be what the officer who may be charged with misconduct would hang his or her badge on. So, and his or her attorney. So I just wanted to be as clear as possible without ambiguity.
certainly.
If this is an opportunity to change the title, why not?
Yeah, I'll put some thought into that. I kind of brushed over the title and yeah, okay.
Yeah, because when you guys say M19, I'm just thinking no one knows that, but only people who are,
Yeah.
comfortable with that particular body of general order. The public wouldn't know what M19 was.
Yeah.
And so, if this is racial
Good point.
profiling, let's call it racial profiling prohibition.
Yeah. Well, racial profile and other prohibited bias-based policing or profiling and whatever, we've got
So
to.
I tell you what, Deputy Chief, this title, which is the first time I'm hearing of the protracted, reference, which is great because it does address the other bias-based policing. Maybe when you have your conversation with Darlene Flynn, maybe you can ask what she might recommend. Because I think to Deacon Lyles and Chair Peterson's points, racial profiling needs to be up there, but at the same time, it needs to be clear that it's more than just racial profiling.
Yeah, great. All right, not a problem. All right, so as I scroll to the right here, I'll make sense of this. So these are all columns and each one represents one violation, two violations, three violations. So first offense, second offense, third offense. So this is the first time you did it, let's say in January of 2020, you did it again in July of 2024, et cetera, et cetera. So what this represents is a range. And what it means is C is the lowest, which means counseling and training. And the range is S3, which is a 3-day suspension. Okay. So just to give you all context, when a case is presented to the chief and the CPRA, let's say, and all those involved in the discipline process, we start in the middle. So we say, okay, this officer violated this section, general conduct. We start in the middle, which would either be a written or 1-day suspension, and we mitigate and aggravate from there. And we have a list of those mitigating and aggravating. So let's say the officer deliberately did this. Okay, that would be an aggravating factor. If the officer's in a supervisory position, such as a field training officer, that's an aggravating factor. A mitigating would be the officer expressed remorse, didn't do it on purpose, was forthright in the investigation, etc. Then that mitigates it down. So that's kind of the science behind it.
Okay, so I have a few thoughts and maybe this is a great precursor to our work on the discipline matrix. I think that racial profiling, name calling, whatever the actions are that are connected to it, is generally so egregious that somebody can say, I didn't mean to, but that doesn't mean anything to me.
Right.
Do you have to start with counseling?
No.
Because racial profiling is so egregious,
Yeah.
I think that you don't start with counseling. I think you start with the aggravation or, the aggravating that somebody could try and talk me down, but, this isn't, to me, racial profiling is so deep-seated in our DNA. I mean, across the country, we all have some sense of bias, really.
Right.
But there's no room for bias inside OPD.
Right.
And if we train well and the discipline correlates with, this is not rudimentary, this isn't, I forgot, I didn't realize, I didn't know, there's none of that.
Yeah, no, a great question. And no, I mean, this is general conduct. So this is why the range is so broad. But for truthfulness, for example, it's straight termination. So the first offense is T for termination.
Mhm.
Yeah. And so but then there's also varying degrees, not for truthfulness, don't separate that. But if we're saying, like, let's say the officer violates the policy by not filling out a stop data form. Let's just say they forgot or whatever. Obviously, that's not as severe as I intentionally racially profiled, etc. So that's where the range comes in. And that's, again, this is going to be difficult project, but that's things to consider.
Okay, so let me finish my point and then I'll call on you, Chair Peterson. So I guess what I'm looking for is perhaps there's a delineation between an administrative oversight and the behavior. I'm really focusing on the behavior.
Right.
I also feel as if, if you're a training officer, if you're a level sergeant or above, you should know this policy like the back of your hand. Therefore, if you are in those leadership roles, then you should be held to a higher standard. I don't know if that works. I don't know if it's reasonable. I'm just sharing that, like when I sit on a disciplinary hearing and actions are taken because the senior officer did not direct, I feel like the problem is the lack of leadership. If you're in a leadership role and you defile or, profile in some way, is there potentially any correlation to discipline based upon the fact that you should know better kind of thing?
Certainly. And in that scenario, one, it would be a violation of this policy because there is a section on accountability, but the added charge against that supervisor commander would be supervisor and commander responsibilities. So that would be a different or added charge with more range in the matrix. So those two things stacked up equal more discipline. Yeah.
Okay, great. Chair Peterson, I'm sorry to have delayed you. I just wanted
No, because I again reflect on the discipline committee meetings that we have had, and we have reviewed reports of investigation which officers have engaged in conduct that common sense would tell you can't engage in. Paying witnesses out of your
but all sense ain't common.
Yeah, and I guess with alligator tears or eyes that are pleading, they convinced the IAD investigators that they didn't know that was a violation. And to me, it's just so common sense. So it doesn't say you can't pay the witness out of your pocket on a Tuesday, and you did it on a Tuesday. And therefore you're cleared because you didn't know. So it's almost like, I know this may not be possible, but I almost want zero tolerance of this.
And we can take that position, certainly.
Yeah,
Okay, let's do it.
well, hold up.
I'm sorry, Deacon Lyles. I'm
Hold up,
running away with
you
the
know, let me
train.
just push back just a little bit.
Okay.
You gonna
push
first
back?
Yeah, and I'm gonna tell you why. And
Okay.
it's not that much of a push.
Okay.
I agree with what Marcia stated. 100%. But it's so much bias in the world. There's not an officer in the uniform that's not biased and haven't acted in a biased way.
Mm-hmm.
Get an officer to sit up and say that he has done that, he's disingenuous. And I'm out of it now, so I'm just telling you the truth. You have, all of us bring to the job these biases. So I want to know if I'm looking at this, the severity of this. What was the result of it in your biased behavior? Did somebody get arrested? Did somebody get beaten up? Then maybe you're fired then. Did somebody, did you just give somebody a ticket and they can prove that it was a biased act? Maybe you get, a day off. And the next time something like this happened, you're terminated. There has to be, in this particular disciplinary act, some flexibility, because we all do it. I'm just being honest with you. You're never going to have a Oakland Police Department that does not have biased officers in it, especially from where they hire from, how they train, the culture in the locker room, when they go out on the drinking parties with, choir practices with one another. You're going to have all that. That's just the culture of policing.
Is it really?
And Lieutenant Hubbard, am I wrong? Am I out to lunch on this, or am I telling the truth?
But isn't that what we're trying to actually get at?
Yes.
Okay.
And yes, and how you manage it is by you saying, okay, we'll have some flexibility in here. You may get one small bite at the apple, but the next time you're out. I don't care what it is.
So
the threat of it.
Are you saying we can't use the term zero tolerance?
Yes, zero tolerance.
Correct.
Zero tolerance it's an impossibility, and it's not. I don't want to use the word logical. It just means it's too high of a mountain to climb in this kind of work that we have to do, with the kind of population that we're serving.
Yeah.
This is a diverse population. It's not homogeneous. You're going to have people accusing officers for racial profiling who are 100% innocent. I've seen that too. And so
I think that, but that should come out in the investigation and the tools that we have to check whether or not the complainant is being truthful. But if an officer is, you're a black MF or you're, some other racial stuff.
Okay. If he's a Sunday morning in front of, St. Columba Church calling somebody a black MF, that's one thing. But if he is accused of saying that and no one heard it, but the person who he targeted after, and then so you got to have some flexibility. You can't assume that the officer is just automatically lying because he's got a uniform on.
But
no, that would only form zero tolerance would only form or fashion the discipline after an investigation that might exonerate the officer.
What I'm saying is in the investigation, and it comes out 55% feel that he did it, 45% said he didn't do it. I don't think you lose your job for that. I think you may get a written reprimand, you may get a day off or something like that, But zero tolerance, I'm assuming your zero tolerance mean termination, correct?
Yeah,
Well,
Yeah,
no, not termination, but starting at a higher level of discipline at the lowest level, if that makes sense.
okay, so
Okay.
basically.
All I'm asking for, and I find myself, I'm asking for some flexibility here. You'll find out you're going to need it
Okay.
Okay,
because the way I want to see this written, this should be all of a sudden a great amount of these cases, and then once the department gets that learning, that understanding, then you'll have zero. Then they'll adhere to the right behavior. And people do make mistakes. They do have bad days.
Okay.
yeah, but we don't want to hear about bad days correlating with name calling or horrendous behavior. But Commissioner Garcia Acosta's hand has been up for a minute, so let's let him join the conversation.
Well, thanks for hearing me.
No, thank you.
Yeah, I have a lot of different thoughts about this, and it's such a robust conversation that it's sparked other thoughts, right? And so, but one, I really like the suggestion of determining whether this is like, because there's so many moving components, there's so many components of M19 that determine is this like an administrative mistake versus something that actually crosses a threshold of the more severe disciplinary action, right? And then that starts to spark the question of, well, what is that threshold, right? And is there a point within the policy, especially since racial profiling is something that's very hard to prove, but is there a point that we establish that there is a threshold that once it crosses that it does become zero tolerance or a fireable offense, or like a level 1 fireable offense? So I'm wondering that, but then also this conversation around about bias, right? And I know in past trainings with OPD around implicit bias, right? Like part of it is also humanizing folks and like acknowledging that bias exists in all of us, right? And really acknowledging, to Deacon Lyons' point, like, hey, some of us have backgrounds where there's a lot of bias, right? That we have to really work towards acknowledging one and working to like kind of unprogram, and that's difficult to do. So I understand there needing to be kind of like a range in terms of discipline so that we could allow folks to work through that. But I do think that there needs to be at some point a threshold in which it becomes so egregious that it does become, I don't know, a qualifier for a level 1 type of, fireable offense. So those are some of my immediate thoughts, but I really do appreciate this conversation.
No, thank you very much, Commissioner. So, Deputy Chief, based upon all of the suggested ways in which to start to delineate, to ensure that we don't conflate, and the issue of bias, what would you suggest as a starting point?
Well, the easiest thing, let's just take this first box right here. We can say C to T. So I know that covers the spectrum, but we can say, hey, even your first offense can result in termination if it's severe enough.
I like that.
It can also be an administrative mistake where it can just be as small as C. So that's, again, doesn't have to stack up to be an ultimate termination. We could put that in the first box, and then we can just kind of balance it out from there.
That sounds outstanding. Is everybody good with that? That there is a flexibility, but it can go from counseling all the way to termination depending upon the behavior.
I can.
Yes,
Deacon Lyles?
Yes, that's the definition of progressive disciplinary behavior.
Yeah,
Yes.
it can progress real quick.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I would think, a hard T would be your second offense. See, that's where I was going with it.
Right.
Okay,
right.
Your second offense, and you got all of these explanations why it didn't happen, but you are the one that's always in this. You need another job somewhere else.
Yeah. Commissioner Garcia Acosta, you good with that?
Yep, absolutely.
So the other thing that we can do to simplify this is, remember, this is only as good as the MR, the Manual of Rules definition, which we talked about in the first policy. So if the definition of this section is straight discriminatory behavior, whether intentional or not, we can
Mhm.
actually carve out the administrative side to some other Manual of Rules violation, just report writing or even general conduct. So that way we can just stick this as specific to discriminatory behavior, period. And it'll make our jobs easier. So the range doesn't have to be so broad, and the chief and everyone else who are stakeholders in this making the decision on discipline just have a straighter path to follow.
Okay, now how do we, is there a narrative to justify that we're going, C to T based upon how egregious the behavior is, or people just supposed to know that? What is the delineation?
Well, I might need to look at our definition again of racial profiling that we plan to insert in the Manual of Rules. If I make it stern enough, like, hey, this is as serious as, let's say, a suspension, maybe it doesn't start with a C. Maybe it's like suspension 1 all the way to termination based on what we wrote in that definition. It's going to be more of a difficult conversation when we actually look at the details of the investigation. And now we're trying to figure out mitigating, aggravating to have a landing spot for the final discipline. That's where we don't like large ranges, because it creates challenges with that. But again, if I carve out the administrative stuff, I think that will sit better with us making the final call on this, but also I think the officers will perceive that better, knowing that, hey, I cannot be discriminatory because this policy says so, and I'm confident that I won't. If I mess up here and there on the administrative side, it has nothing to do with me being discriminatory. It's just, I need to be better organized. So I can carve those two things out.
Okay, and is that done in other policies, or would this be somewhat unique?
Yeah, I will add that this policy as a whole needs to be updated to include how discipline is finally determined. So that is, I think, when we form this other ad hoc, a good opportunity for us to hash that out. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, great. Well, I totally appreciate your conversation, Deacon Lyles, especially since it's coming from you, because of the knowledge that bias is everywhere, not just in the OPD. And I fully appreciate Deputy Chief's separation of the administrative piece to just focus in on the behavior. And I do think the S to the T, meaning suspension determination, makes sense there. Hopefully people will appreciate on its face its full update, its historical background, and recognize that discipline related to this is just not something they want to fool with.
Yes, that's the training.
Yep.
I don't want to see a lot of officers getting fired. I want them to change their behavior.
Correct. Yeah, and
So you gotta. And by the way, has there been a promotion somewhere that I have missed?
No,
yeah, he's acting, but
Yeah.
we go ahead. You go ahead and
No.
explain it.
I'm acting. Deputy Chief Tedesco is on leave. He's attending some training, so I'm covering for him. So no official promotion.
We would like to see him be deputy chief. I
Yes.
know I would, based upon
Yeah.
all the different spaces that he's been in and the continually excellent work.
Yeah.
But it's partially Tedesco, and it's partially that there's no senior team.
Yeah.
So so we're glad to see you in a stronger leadership role, even if it's short term, because we hope that maybe it'll be long term based
Thank you.
upon your work.
Seed planting.
There you go, seed planting. I like that. Woo! Okay, so do we need to do anything more on this part, Deputy Chief? Is that just for you to finish up?
Yep, I will I have my notes on what I'm going to change in the policy. I will take one more look at the definition and the manual of rules to make sure it aligns with what we talked about this evening. And maybe what I can do is have some mock-ups of different ranges and maybe my reasoning behind it. And you don't necessarily have to choose it, but it'll kind of put us on I think on the right path.
Okay. I think that sounds great. And that may or may not be something you want to speak to Darlene about as well. I don't know.
I will. Yep.
Yeah, because I still believe, and I have to double check with her, but everybody in the city of Oakland has not gone through race and equity training. And when we talk about ensuring that people are in alignment for a culture that is fair and equitable, it would seem to me that needs some consideration. So, Deputy Chief, you have definitions, you have cleanup language in both M19. We're gonna review the preamble, and then you're gonna clean up the discipline ranges for us to consider the next meeting. And it will be the meeting following that you will present us, I think, with the training documents. Is that, I feel like that's closer to the end of June. Does that make sense?
Yes, I'm confident that I can have the training documents done by the end of June. So if we're pretty close to finalizing this policy in the next meeting, then that will give me that time to really start hammering out the training.
Okay, so our next meeting will be June 12th. And the meeting after that would be June 24th? No, June 26th. And so I think that I will invite Dr. Everhart. We can send her all of our information in advance of the 26th and invite her to be our guest for the 26th meeting. Does that sound cool?
Great. Yeah.
Okay. And even if she can't come, hopefully she'll give us some feedback. And then we can begin to craft our letter to Post and the Department of Justice in order to send off what our learnings have been, what our updates are looking like, and why, so that if they decide that maybe they want to do some updating of their own, they can have some learnings from a little old police department that's done some pretty magnificent work and some egregious work. So therefore, it will show the range of progress. For those of you listening and participating, this is the end of the objectives that we were trying to accomplish for today, and we've done it with 12 minutes to spare. I want to thank you all. I want to give you back your time and know that we will be mostly cleaning up and finalizing all these documents on June 12th, and then going through the training on June 26th. Sound reasonable?
Sounds like a plan to me.
Yes, thank you for your great work.
Outstanding. Thank you everyone for your extraordinary contributions. And again, Deputy Chief, yeah, I'm hoping that you get some sleep sometime. I know that there's probably no vacation in your future, but want to say thank you so much. And then what our North Star is to begin very quickly after we finish this, the discipline matrix, because that too has not been updated in 20 years.
Indeed.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Everyone have a good evening. Be safe.
Okay.
Good night.
Appreciate it. Bye-bye.